also care to cultivate and retain virtue and even religion in a cheerful mood of mind. The grumpy, despondent, Carthusian-like compliance of one's duty, as if groaning under a tyrannical yoke, is not reverence, but servile fear, and through that, hatred of the law. Immanuel Kant. In my lecture, What is Philosophy? I explained that to Kant there's a formal philosophy where reason only deals with itself and its own structure, its own laws, that is logics. But apart from this formal philosophy, there's a material philosophy where reason is not dealing with itself, but with something else that it is trying to grasp, to understand. And this material philosophy, as said, has two parts to Kant, theoretical and practical philosophy, because there are two possible matters, two possible contents to deal with. There is one, that which is, that which exists, nature in the widest possible sense. And then two, there is that which ought to be, which shall be. There is freedom, the laws of freedom. How should freedom be used? What should be done with freedom? And then in my lecture on what is metaphysics, I went on to explain that Kant, each of those two has a pure part, a metaphysical part, where we use only reason to understand, to gain cognition. And then there's also an applied or empirical part of the science where we use experience and we try gaining cognition, gaining knowledge through experience. Now, when it comes to theoretical philosophy, the philosophy that deals with the rules of being, metaphysics or pure science here means thinking about what is simply from reason, not using any experience. So thinking about the supersensual. Is there God? Is there an immortal soul and a life after death, and so on? While empirical practical philosophy is natural science, right? It means thinking about that which is, which exists, which we know from experience. That is, of course, nature. So it is the science dealing with nature. When it comes to practical philosophy, the metaphysics, the pure science, is the metaphysics of morals. We are asking reason and reason alone, without using any experience, what should be done with freedom? How should we act? What laws should freedom follow? And that is, of course, the moral laws. Now, this moral philosophy, this metaphysics of morals, in turn is separated into ethics and right. But both of them ask reason alone what should be done, without using experience. As I explained in the lecture on metaphysics, the question for applied practical philosophy is a bit more difficult. Applied theoretical philosophy, as I said, that's easy, that's just natural science. When it comes to applied practical philosophy, there is none in the strictest sense, Kant would say. Because practical philosophy would mean it deals with freedom. Being applied philosophy would mean it is based on experience. But experience, of course, is always experience of being, of that which exists, right? We cannot experience a shall. We cannot experience what ought to be done. We can only experience what is and what has been done. But if we want to talk about there being a sort of practical philosophy, then there's two possibilities what it could be. For one, and more properly, it could be what Kant calls moral anthropology. That would be the teaching of how to make people moral, right? Like, for example, how should we raise children so they become good people? And also, how should I deal with myself so I am moral, right? How can I deal with certain temptations I have? Like, maybe I'm prone to getting aggressive and angry, and to attacking people. How can I rein that in? Or maybe I'm prone to cheating on my wife, or whatever. What can I do with that? This science would use experience in being anthropology, right? It would study the human being, how humans function, how their psyche works, what sort of obstacles there are in the human being to morality. But it would be practical philosophy because it would deal with what ought to be, how we ought to behave, right? So in that case, you could say the pure practical philosophy, the metaphysics of morals, just says what is the moral law, what ought to happen. And that moral law is universal. It's not just true for human beings, it would also be true for intelligent aliens or for angels or whatever. But then, how we as human beings, that can be studied empirically, how we specifically can follow this moral law, that might be specific to us, right? It could be imagined that there are other beings, other rational beings that also ought to follow the moral law, but that don't have these same obstacles that we have. Maybe they have others, maybe they have none. So in that sense, this moral anthropology, dealing with what is the human being, and based on that, how can he become moral or stay moral, could be considered the applied practical philosophy. But, and that is what is relevant now here, for what I want to discuss, you could also say applied practical philosophy would be the doctrine of happiness. So the teaching that tells us not how to be moral, but rather how should we act to be happy. This would be practical philosophy in the sense that it doesn't say what is, but rather what is to be done, what ought to happen, right? What should I do? How should I use my freedom in order to become happy? But it would be empirical, in the sense, that the goal, happiness, is something I only know I have because of experience, right? From thinking alone, from pure reason, we cannot tell that we want to be happy. It's just that in experience, every human being finds himself wanting to be happy rather than unhappy. And also it would be an empirical philosophy, this doctrine of happiness, in that how we do become happy is also something that reason alone cannot tell us, but rather we know only from experience. And this doctrine of happiness is precisely what I want to talk about after I spent over a year talking about the pure practical philosophy, the metaphysics of morals. I want to spend at least some lectures on what Kant has to say about the doctrine of happiness, how we as human beings become happy. And this has once in antiquity been a very central question for philosophy, specifically the post-Socratic philosophy with its various schools like the Stoics, the Epicureans, the Cynics, the Aristotelians. They all dealt with the question, what is the good life? How can we become happy? And this one central question, however, was sort of forced into the background with the advent of Christianity. Because, of course, Christianity would rather focus on your soul and the afterlife, right? Will you earn eternal damnation? Or will you be blessed and go to heaven? That is what matters to Christianity, not so much the happiness here in this life, which is indeed why the Bible, the New Testament, even warns of the philosophers. And of course, what it means is specifically these philosophers like the Stoics, like the Epicureans in the time the New Testament was written, that were dealing with the good life. The Bible warns of them because they are considered tempting the people away from taking care of their soul. But in modernity, there has been a new turn away from this imagined afterlife, and you could say back to the here, back to the present. And I would indeed claim that this is one of the most important, one of the most defining moments of modern thinking, right? You could say it begins with the humanism of the Renaissance, which focused on the human being, but also with the Reformation of the Renaissance, which of course was faith-based, but a large point was the rejection of monkdom and the monastery life and so on, and the insistence that you need to be here in this world where God put you. And of course, in more recent times, this tendency only radicalized and only became more obvious, with someone like Nietzsche saying, stay true to the earth, right? Don't flee into some lofty dreams of heaven. Rather be an inhabitant, a citizen here of this earth. In the 20th century, someone like Wilhelm Reich or like Hannah Arendt, they had very life-affirming, world-affirming thoughts, philosophies. Likewise, the philosophy of my dad, by which I, of course, am very much influenced, is very much one that embraces life, this life here. And this movement that to a large degree, I would say, defines modernity, this movement back to this life, this is something that Kant himself was a part of. That is not to say that Kant has written or drafted a specific doctrine of happiness. There's no book or essay of his titled How to Lead a Good Life or whatever. And indeed, Kant would say no such thing is possible in the strictest sense. You cannot give a general doctrine of happiness, precisely because here you are not working with pure reason alone. Here you are working with experience. And it turns out in experience that everyone is different, right? And what makes one person happy maybe doesn't make the other person happy. Maybe it would actually make the other person unhappy, right? Maybe what is your favorite food is not tasty to me, and I would just spit it out in disgust. So, not the same things bring pleasure, let alone happiness, to everyone. So in a way, every human being has to find his own personal doctrine of happiness, which cannot simply be generalized. And as a side note, that alone is a reason why in the metaphysics of morals, be it in ethics or be it in the field of right, Kant rejects eudaimonism. That is something I have discussed in several of my previous lectures on these topics. Eudaimonism comes from the Greek eudaimonia, which is the word for happiness. And eudaimonism, therefore, would be a principle in moral philosophy saying what matters most, what we should focus on is how to get happy. Kant rejects that for various reasons, but one reason clearly is that no general laws that are applicable for everyone could be deduced from that. And therefore, if we try to create such a general doctrine of happiness as the basis of our morality and of our right, of our legality, it only has terrible consequences. Like in the field of right, it will lead to a paternalistic despotism that tries to force people to be happy according to one specific concept of happiness, right? So, for example, when it's faith-based, then the leaders might say, oh, if you are gay or whatever, you will go to hell. So we will just prohibit being gay, right? It's for your own good. We are preventing you from hell. Well, maybe that's your belief, but maybe that's not the belief of all of your citizens, particularly all of the gay ones. So through this eudaimonism, since there are no general rules for eudaimonia, for happiness, you are probably making a lot of people very unhappy. Nevertheless, despite Kant being convinced that there can be no general doctrine of happiness, he does talk at several points. He makes a lot of remarks about how to gain happiness, or at least how to prevent unhappiness, particularly in his anthropology. His book, The Anthropology, that's indeed the last book that he himself finished. There were like 3 more books that were published during his lifetime: his pedagogy, his physical geography, his logics. But all of them were finalized by acquaintances and students of Kant's that he authorized doing that. He gave his notes and his lecture papers to them because he himself was too old and his mental faculties would not allow him anymore to finalize these. The Anthropology was the last book he finalized, and its full title is Anthropology from a Pragmatic Point of View. And pragmatic to Kant is always that which deals with prudence, is always that which is about becoming happy. And there's not just this book, The Anthropology from a Pragmatic Point of View. Rather, throughout his about 40 years of being a professor, Kant would again and again give lectures on anthropology. In fact, they were about amongst his most regular lectures. And also amongst the lectures that had the most listeners. And these lectures also were pragmatic in their aim. So this means when Kant dealt with anthropology, right, with the teaching, the doctrine of the human being, what is the human being, his aim was not to go in depth from a biological or psychological perspective. His aim was not to go to the very roots of all the phenomena of the human being, to explain everything that could be observed in the human beings, to explain human nature from its very roots. That was not the goal, but rather the explicitly stated goal of Kant was helping people, helping particularly his young students who were teenagers or maybe early adults. Back then, you would probably start university a little earlier than today, so many of his students were probably like 16-year-olds. His aim was to help them find a place in the world, in society, right, amongst other human beings. Once they would go out of university, find a job, be established in the world, his aim was, through the anthropology, helping them understand themselves and their fellow human beings and their society better, so that they would move throughout society and throughout life and deal with themselves, with their own feelings, their own desires, and also with other human beings in a more prudent manner. So in a manner that leads to their own happiness. And Kant also, while he does say that there can be no general doctrine of happiness, like you cannot just give some general laws that everyone simply needs to follow in order to be happy, he does say that you do need to reflect on how to become happy. He is convinced that if you don't think about this at all, you probably won't be happy. You can, of course, go through life mindless and thoughtless. And that does not necessarily mean that your whole life will just be a living hell. No, the thoughtless people that never reflect on the principles of happiness can, of course, experience pleasures in life. Maybe they can even experience intense pleasures. Maybe they can go through life treating it like a big party. But for those people, life will probably be a roller coaster. So they will have maybe even intense pleasures, but maybe equally intense displeasures, right? One day you're having a party, having a good time. The next morning you're waking up with a headache because you drank too much. To Kant, pleasure in a moment is not the same as constant, lasting happiness throughout your life. And if you want the latter, you should probably use your head, so to say. You should use reason, not just blindly follow each whim and each desire. So Kant does believe that true happiness is achieved through principles, through rational principles according to which you live your life. And while there can be no generally valid doctrine of happiness in detail, there can be some general principles as guidelines or as rails or borders for how we should live our lives that do more or less apply for every human being. And these Kant discusses, and these I want to discuss in my next few lectures. And I will point out that when it comes to this topic, Kant is generally less original than in other areas of his thinking. I mean, Kant is of immense importance in the history of thought. He very much revolutionized philosophy in other areas, like in theoretical philosophy or in pure practical philosophy, so in moral philosophy. Kant did not revolutionize the thinking of happiness. Here he is very much influenced by the authors of antiquity he himself read, like the ancient Stoics, the ancient Epicureans, and he agrees with them in many ways. And a lot of what he has to say is sort of, you could say, the common wisdom of all philosophers that came before him. There are certainly some nuances or some examples, some anecdotes that are specific to Kant. But the overall picture, the overall advice he would give you for leading a happy life is something you could probably also find or be familiar with from other philosophers. So if, for example, you have studied the Stoics and the Epicureans, you will probably not find so many new thoughts in Kant when it comes to the topic of happiness. Nevertheless, I do want to talk about it because first I want to be exhaustive. I want in this lecture series to talk about all of Kant's thinking, not just the most original parts. Second, while maybe not being the most original part of his thinking, that doesn't mean that it's wrong or let alone worthless. I think he does have some very correct convictions on the topic of happiness. And third, unfortunately, this is a topic that is almost never discussed. When it comes to popular to introductory discussions of Kant, people mostly focus on some main topics, on the more original parts of his work. And for example, here on YouTube, you will probably not find many other videos about what Kant has to say about how to become happy. And unfortunately, this also often leads to certain distortions and certain wrong cliches in how people picture both Kant as a person, what people think his character was, and also in accordance with that, how they picture his moral philosophy. I believe that the fact we don't talk more about what Kant has to say about happiness leads to misunderstandings of his moral teachings and how they might be in conflict with happiness or actually align with it. The latter is the case, which are very unfortunate. Because a lot of misunderstanding of Kant's moral philosophy is just based on people thinking that it is in contradiction with happiness somehow, which is not the case at all. There is this old prejudice that, at least here in the West, is very deeply rooted because it comes largely from Platonism and Christianity, which of course have very much influenced the West and keep doing so to this day, even in secularized form. And this prejudice is that morality and your self-interest or happiness, which is of course the aim of your self-interest, are somehow at odds with each other. Or that sensuality, and of course happiness is based on sensuality, right? Happiness is a sensual feeling. If we didn't have sensuality, if we didn't have bodies, if we were just purely rational spirits, we would not aspire to happiness. There's this prejudice that sensuality is at odds with morality. And like I said, this is a Platonic or very much a Christian prejudice. I mean, in the early days of Christianity, there was this whole thought that the devil is the one that tempts us, right? The devil promises all the pleasures of this world, luxury, sex, power, and we have to abstain the early Christianity preached a certain asceticism. The most holy people were those who became hermits in the desert, or who became monks in the monastery, where they would only pray and work, right? If you read legends of Christian saints from late antiquity or from the Middle Ages, you will find, and maybe you will be surprised to find, that many of those saints are considered saints not because they did something so morally good, not because they helped other people, but simply for their asceticism, for abstaining from the pleasures of this life. Like you will have stories of, let's say, a young virgin that her father wanted to marry off, and she said, no, I'm a bride of Christ, I want to stay a virgin. Right, the point is not that it's a forced marriage, that she doesn't like this specific husband. Maybe he is a very good looking, very rich young man. But the point is that she doesn't want any husband at all. She wants to stay a virgin. And so they torture her to death. And during all the torture, she still stays firm in not wanting to marry, wanting to remain a virgin. And now she's praised for that and considered a saint, right? Or you will have stories of saints that abstained from food so much that they were just laying in their cell in the monastery, and that they were so weak they could not get up. Now, I would say that means making yourself completely useless, making yourself essentially a parasite, instead of being a good person who maybe helps other people, maybe helps change the world for the better. But they are considered saints precisely that, for abstaining from the sensual pleasures. So you would find in these earlier Christian writings praise of people for not having sex, for not eating, for not bathing. And as a side note, there's of course this racist prejudice that people in the Middle Ages did not bathe. And I'm saying racist because, let's face it, there is hardly any stronger racism than the racism against the past. People love to pretend like they are smarter, they are more civilized, they are more enlightened, they are more aufklärt than people of the past. Just like nowadays, in the present, they are racist towards other cultures that they consider to be more in the past, that they consider to be more primitive. They are racist against the past, and this cannot be disconnected, right? Racism is always connected with this notion of progress, this notion of more backwards, more primitive, and more advanced societies. You cannot be racist in the present without also looking back on your own past with the same attitude. And racism in the present will never go away without us also learning to look at the past with a more open mind. So there's this racism against the Middle Ages that brings us this cliche that people were super dirty and never bathed. This is of course not true. In fact, there was a big bathing culture. There were lots of bathhouses. But there were specific stories of saints that would not bathe or not groom their bodies, and they would get super dirty. Or the story tells how someone is completely overgrown with hair, like is going naked but is still covered because they're so overgrown with hair. And this is praised as a saintly act. I mean, that should be precisely an indicator that the normal people did bathe, right? Otherwise, it would not have been something special to praise. It's just that bathing back then was not so much considered simply a necessary act of hygiene. but rather it was considered something fun, some form of luxury, some form of pleasure. And therefore, if being a good person, being a person truly following God means asceticism, means abstaining from all the pleasures, then it also means not bathing. And what I'm saying is that this concept of morality is something that prevails into our own days, even in secularized form. There's still this thought that you can either be a good person, but that means probably abstaining from certain pleasures or from certain advantages, or you can have a happy life, you can have fun in life, but that probably means not caring about morality. That probably means only being out for yourself and your own self-interest. I mean, just consider the way the climate debate is framed. People get super angry because they believe that by trying to save human civilization and the human species survival, we want to take away their cars, their flying on vacation, their meat, and they treat this like it's about all the joy taken out of their life, right? Like you can either do what's right, save the climate, or you can do what's fun, right? Eat a steak. I do find it curious that the people complaining the most about this, acting like there's an attempt to steal all the joy from their lives, are at the same time the people who have the least joy in their lives. I mean, just look at these angry right-wingers, these angry climate change deniers. They're always angry, they're always resentful, they're always screaming. Their life has no joy. But be that as it may, there is this prejudice that morality and sensuality or happiness are at odds with one another. And this prejudice is also very much applied to Kant. People believe that Kant's whole moral philosophy is very cold, very joyless, demanding from us a form of complete self-denial, demanding from us to essentially become emotionless robots that just follow their moral duty like some programming, and don't care about their own self-preservation, let alone their own happiness at all. And to be sure, Kant does talk of duty a lot in morality. He stresses that morality is not about following pleasures, but about doing your duty, and that morality should not be based on feelings. That even if you have by your nature no feelings of compassion for others, even if by your nature you're rather cold-hearted, you should still, simply because it is the right thing to do, simply because it is your moral duty, help others. And to be sure, there is the matter of Kant's rigorism, which I discussed in its own lecture. Kant is very strict about morality. He insists that the moral law must be holy, that we must not water it down so it fits our human weaknesses better, but rather we must take its absolute demands seriously. And yes, to be sure, Kant does say that we should follow this strict, this holy moral law, simply because it's the right thing to do. And he goes so far as to say that what truly matters in morality is not your outer actions, do your actions conform with the moral law, or do they break it? But rather it is why you are doing these actions. And as I discussed in my lecture on radical evil, he goes so far as to say, if you always do the right thing, if you always help others, never hurt others, and so on, but you do it not strictly because it is the right thing, but you do it, even if just partially, because you like doing it, because you're naturally, by your good heart, by your compassion, by your friendliness, inclined to doing the right thing, then that alone already makes you an evil person. That is how radical Kant here is. And yes, also Kant does very strictly separate the two halves of the highest good. I will soon in some weeks give a lecture on what is the highest good. But briefly, Kant would say the highest good consists of A, virtue, and thereby being worthy of happiness, and B, the one who is a good person, who possesses virtue, who is worthy of happiness, also having happiness. If we only have one of these halves, someone being good but unhappy, or someone being happy but without deserving it, without being a good person, then that's not truly good. And Kant insists very strictly on separating these two halves, the virtue and the happiness. And he would say that in case of conflict, the first half, the virtue, should always come first. We should sacrifice our happiness, if necessary, to do what's right. So, yeah, sure, if you are, let's say, in a despotic or tyrannical system, and you could survive and be fine simply by holding your head down, you should not do that. Like, if you live under the Nazis and a Jew asks you to hide him, then you should not turn him away because you don't want to risk your life if you are discovered, but rather you should help. So to be sure, the moral duty does take precedent before our own happiness, our own self-interest. All of this leads people to easily think that Kant is a proponent of what Nietzsche would later call and criticize as slave morality. Precisely this morality of self-denial, of asceticism, of being humble, of being altruistic instead of egoistic, of rejecting your own pleasure, rejecting life itself. And Nietzsche, of course, would criticize this slave morality and would say that all life is will to power. All life consists of gaining, swallowing, embracing, growing in power. And therefore, this slave morality that claims to reject the will to power, claims to reject the growth that is life, is anti-life itself. However, Kant is not at all a proponent of slave morality. The issue is simply that very few people have truly understood Kant, and very few people have truly understood Nietzsche. And therefore, the number of people that have extensively studied both and that have truly understood both is even smaller than that. But as someone who has read all the works of both these thinkers and who has understood them, I would say Kant himself says that the moral law essentially is about freedom, right? I said that in earlier lectures. All of morality to Kant, whether it's towards others or also towards yourself, because to Kant, there are duties you have towards yourself. All morality is ultimately about protecting freedom, right? Not taking someone's freedom away. Like if you murder someone, you take his freedom away. And if you can, even extending freedom, making others and yourself more free. And if this is what morality is about, then it cannot be slave morality. Then it cannot be at odds with what Nietzsche calls the will to power, because Kant himself says that freedom is the highest degree of life. So a morality that is about freedom, about protecting and expanding our freedom, cannot be anti-life. It is instead just what Nietzsche wants, a morality that affirms, embraces, and intensifies life. I mean, if you really understand Kant, you will understand that the point of his morality and the point of maybe rejecting following every base sensual desire is not saying, oh, sensuality is evil, having fun in life, being happy is evil, do not give in to temptations. The point is rather that if you're a slave to your sensual desires, that will take your own freedom away, right? Like the drug addict follows his desire for the next shot very clearly. Since he's addicted, he's not free, right? He cannot guide himself through his own reason. So if you become a slave to your most animalistic, most sensual desires, this is not acting in your self-interest, doing what's best for you. Rather, it means that a part of you, in a way, is eating up the whole, right? Just this is in a psychological way kind of what in a biological way cancer is, where a part of you, some of the cells of the body, sort of develop a life of their own, and it ends up destroying the body. When actually in a healthy body, the whole works together as an organic whole, and the parts are sort of governed by the whole. And just like in a healthy psyche, the parts, the specific desires serve the whole and are parts of the whole and are governed by the whole, and not growing and overgrowing the whole like some cancer. And by the way, this might be more than a simple analogy. If you study Wilhelm Reich, the student of Freud, who turned towards biology, and who studied cancer, to him there was a deeper connection between the psyche and the body, and certain mental issues and the development of cancer. I cannot go into this here because this is still a Kant lecture, but at some later point in the future I would like to talk about Wilhelm Reich also. For me, it's just important here to stress that Kant's philosophy, including or specifically as moral philosophy, is not life rejecting, like this Platonic Christian slave morality Nietzsche rejects, but rather is life affirming, is a philosophy that wants to intensify life. Again, it wants to intensify freedom as the highest form of life. And so, after having talked about Kant's practical philosophy for over a year, in these last few lectures on that, I want to take a look at what he has to say about happiness, and I want to, in particular, do away with this prejudice that Kant rejects sensuality altogether. No, Kant does not do so. He does not say that we should completely desensualize ourselves. If anything, he and with his philosophy is the great apologist of sensuality, giving sensuality its due and its rights. And this is very much true for his theoretical philosophy, right? Where essentially the whole point of the critique of pure reason is that pure reason alone can think up all sorts of things. We can think of a God, we can think of a life after death and come up with arguments in support of them, but also with arguments to disprove them. But what we need is always some form of viewing. What we need is always some form of sensuality to gain cognition. Pure reason alone does not lead to any cognitions. But Kant is an apologist of sensuality, not just in theoretical philosophy, but also, and that's my point here, in practical philosophy. While many thinkers before Kant said, and also still some thinkers after Kant, that evil comes from sensuality, comes from our sensual desires, right? People murder out of hatred and aggression, or people rape out of lust or whatever. Kant would say that no, that is not a radical evil. And radical, I gave a whole lecture on the radical evil. Radical here does not mean extreme, right? It's not about how big the evil act is I commit or how small and trivial it is, but rather radical comes from the Latin word for root, which is radix. So Kant is talking about the root of evil, whether the outcome is big and extreme or small and moderate. And to Kant, if anything, the radical evil lies in the decision to not first and foremost follow the moral law, but rather to follow your desires. Not the sensual desires as such are the evil, but my decision to follow them. And they cannot tempt me as such to evil, because I could not be tempted if I didn't care about them. So I first must make the decision to care about them, to give them such power over me, to then follow them. And that decision itself cannot be determined by them, by the sensual desires. Again, I gave a whole lecture on that. If you want to understand that better, you can turn to the lecture on the radical evil. So Kant does not say that the moral law demands of us to completely reject our sensual desires, that in order to be good people, we need to stop doing what feels good for us, stop seeking pleasure in life or whatever. No, you don't need to reject your sensuality, but you do need to govern it. You need to bring a sort of harmony into your sensual desires. Indeed, that would be true strength and greatness in the human being. To not kill off, not euthanize your desires, but bring harmony into them. Just like a ruler in a state is not a great ruler if he just oppresses the people or the mob or whatever, and just rules with despotic powers, but rather he would be a truly great ruler if he managed to create harmony between the various people, the individuals, also the groups, the various classes or states in the state, and also between the people, the citizenry, and the state as a whole. If he gives room for everyone's interests instead of just oppressing some people's interests to fulfill others, then he would be a great ruler. And so this is also why Kant, for example, criticizes the antique Stoics. Well, he was very much influenced by them, having read many of the great Roman authors in his youth, in his school years, and having learned a lot from them. He does say that the Stoics tend to go too far. They tend towards what he calls Schwärmerei in German, which you could translate as raving, which is always to him about overstepping the limits of our reason. And specifically, he says when the Stoics claim that you should reject sensuality altogether, that you should not care about what happens to your body and how it feels, about sensual pleasure or sensual pain at all. That is too extreme for a human being. And therefore, when the Stoics claim that it is possible in this earthly life to be completely happy, not just to be happy, but to be fully happy, not because they claim it is possible to live a life without any pain, but rather precisely because they say, ignore your pain, your sensuality doesn't matter. I mean, some Stoics went so far as saying the wise person, the sage, can be fully happy even while being tortured, simply because he would tell himself, oh, that torture just affects my body, that pain I'm feeling is just physical, that doesn't matter, my mind, my spirit is above that. Kant says that's too extreme. He would not say that the sage can be happy doing torture. He would say claiming that is raving. No, sensuality and sensual pleasure, sensually feeling good matters, and is okay. You are within your rights to seek that. Just again, you should govern your sensual desires, and you should restrain them or put them within the limits of the moral law so they don't come into conflict with that. And even this restriction or regulation of sensuality instead of its utter rejection that Kant demands, he demands not only in the name of morality, but also in the name of pragmatism. So, of what serves our sensuality best, of what makes us happy. Because indeed, and this is quite important to me, this is something I want to stress here, and I will further show in the next upcoming lectures. Not only does Kant not say, as this Platonic Christian prejudice goes, that morality and sensuality are at odds, and you can only be a good person by rejecting your own self-interest. But quite contrary, Kant would say that most of the time they align. Most of the time, what is the moral law, what is your moral duty, what you should do, is also what would be the most prudent, but would be the most advantageous to you. Kant would say that most of the time, the same actions, the same debaucheries that are immoral, that maybe harm others, but more often than not, they harm your own dignity. And as I explained in my earlier lecture on the duties towards yourself, those duties that are about living as a truly human being, not sinking to the level of an animal, but rather having reverence for your own human dignity as a rational being, those are indeed the most important duties. Those are at the fundament of all morality to Kant. And the same actions that would go against your own dignity they will more often than not also go against your own self-interest. They will maybe bring you short-term pleasures, but in the long term, they will harm you. A big point here is your health, right? And I already also gave a lecture on what Kant has to say about health. I gave a lecture on the philosopher as a healer, because Kant believes that while the physician is there for therapy, for healing you again once you're sick, your diet is more a matter of your own philosophy, your own personal wisdom. So finding a lifestyle that helps you retaining your health, so that ideally you don't even need the physician in the first place. And Kant would say, as I explained in that other lecture, that living a moral life is probably also living the most healthy life. To him, again, it is immoral because it goes against the duty towards yourself to follow the most base desires, like to get blackout drunk, to get into all sorts of drugs, to be a glutton who just stuffs himself. That's not dignified. And clearly, at the same time, it's also not healthy. And Kant would say that health is the greatest fortune, or also the greatest happiness in a way that a human being can have. By this, Kant means health both of body and of mind, physical and mental health. And the reason why this is such a great fortune, why this is so important for happiness, is twofold. Because for one, Kant says he who is healthy needs the least in life, right? Of course, there are still things you need even as a healthy person, like you need food, otherwise you will not stay healthy for long. But if you're not healthy, you will need many more things, right? Maybe you will need some medication. Maybe you will need some tools, like maybe you will need a wheelchair if you're not healthy in your body, in your legs or whatever. Maybe if you're not healthy in your eyes, you need glasses, right? And there can be more or less that you need. Like, surely needing glasses is not the most terrible disadvantage that you can have in life. But still, it is a sort of disadvantage as compared to not needing glasses. And Kant's point is, the more unhealthy you are, the more sick you are, the more you probably need, the more you are probably dependent. And so therefore, the more there is possible causes for being unhappy, for being dissatisfied, while the more healthy you are of body and mind, the more independent you are, the less things you need. That's the one point. And the other point is that the more healthy you are, the more you have the strength to get that which you need, right? Not only do you need less, that which you still do need, you also can get for yourself. So if I'm healthy, as I said, I still need food, but if I get hungry, I can get my own food. I can go out and buy it, or I mean, you could even go and hunt your own food or farm your own food or whatever if you're healthy. While if, let's say, you are sick and you cannot go up from your bed, you need others to help you, right? And the more sick you are, the more dependent, because you yourself are weak, you lack the strength to get what you need, the more dependent you are on others, which again is a possible cause for unhappiness. So health of body and mind, since it means needing less, and having more strength to get what little you need yourself is a key component for happiness. And again, being healthy is something that being moral contributes to a lot. So again, Kant would say that most of the time the moral life and the prudent life is really the same. There can be, of course, situations when they don't align. Like, as I already said, if in the Nazi times a Jew asked me to hide him, sure, morality tells me, yes, help your neighbor. Prudence tells me, don't risk your own life if you're discovered. But I mean, those are exceptional situations. How often does the average person really get into such situations? But more often than not, and this is both true for personal ethics of the individual, but it's also true for politics, like for how the state should behave. As I explained in my lectures on Kant's philosophy of right, most of the time, doing what's right is also doing what's best for you. And actually, Kant goes so far as to say that at least the civilized person cannot attain happiness without first becoming wise and moral. Now, the uncivilized person, the savage, to him, maybe happiness is more easy to attain because it's more simple. It's more about just satisfying your basic needs, like not going hungry or whatever. But when it comes to culture and civilization, here Kant is very much influenced by Rousseau, who was very pessimistic about our civilization. And he would say that for all its seeming advantages, all in all, civilization has made us more unhappy, right? I mean, there are so many possibilities to satisfy possible desires now. They create new desires in the first place, right? I mean, no one in the Stone Ages was unhappy about not having the newest iPhone or not having clothes from some famous brand or not having an expensive sports car. All these are possible desires and possible causes of unhappiness that only come with civilization, right? Also all sorts of other problems, like consider the loneliness crisis. That is definitely a crisis of civilization. Kant is not quite as pessimistic as Rousseau. He does not, like Rousseau, demand us to go back to nature. He would say that it is possible to become happy in a society, in a civilized society. But again, it requires a lot of wisdom, and it requires the morality to abstain from certain unnecessary things, from certain unnecessary needs or whatever. And if you don't have that wisdom, if you don't have that morality, you will also not be able to act in a prudent enough manner to deal with living in a society. So, again, it is true that Kant is a moral rigorist, but that does not mean that he rejects sensuality or pleasure or happiness. I already gave a lecture on the rigorism, a lecture on is Kant's morality too strict and unrealistic. And in that lecture, I explained that the rigorism to Kant means rigorism in the principles of morality. So again, the moral law must be holy, must not be watered down. We must, when we discuss it, only discuss what ought to be, what would be good, not oh, but is this demanding too much for us? Oh, but is this aligning with my self-interest? The question is simply, is it good or is it evil? But I already said in that lecture that the rigorism does not mean we can judge people. We can judge actions. We can say, this action you should not have done. It is against the moral law. But we cannot look into people's hearts. I cannot say how good or how evil someone truly is, because I don't know where that action truly came from, right? I don't know how much restraint it maybe cost him to not commit an even more evil action or whatever. Again, that I discussed in this earlier lecture on, is Kant's morality too strict? But now I can add that the rigorism in principles, the moral law as such must be holy, also does not mean that in the application you must have an overly strict purism. Because while Kant is all for rigorism in morality, he rejects purism. A purism that cares about even the most small and trivial matter, and makes it a big moral question. Like Kant jokes about people who will say not just, okay, you should give charity to the poor, that is your moral duty, but who will also discuss whether you should give the charity with the right hand or with the left hand. Kant would say, what does it matter? If you donate money to the poor, if you help with poverty, that's what matters morally. Not if you get up out of your bed in the morning with the right or with the left foot first. For example, Kant talks about certain purists in his time that said priests should not play cards in society. Like a priest should be better than that, should be a better moral example, should not in his pastime play cards. Kant says, why not? Let a man play cards. There's nothing wrong with that. Or there were certain purists who said that you should not laugh. That you should always be serious, that is more befitting of a rational being, of human dignity, and that laughing is too childish or not serious enough. And this is also something that Kant disagrees with. It's not immoral to laugh. Indeed, Kant says at some point that the man of some intellect will like to laugh, but he's not likely to laugh. So meaning, the more intellect you have, the more refined maybe is your humor. So no, you will probably not laugh like some little teenager about every fart joke or dick joke you hear. But you will enjoy laughing, which is something I can very much understand. I mean, I used to, when I was still young and naive, like when I was still 14 or so, I used to watch a lot of political comedy. And like Germany has a big tradition of that. Like we have two separate forms of comedy. The one is called comedy with the English word, which is considered more for the masses and which is more, I don't know, like making the usual jokes about your girlfriend or whatever. And the one is called cabaret, which is more political and which is supposed to have more witty jokes. And I used to watch that a lot, but nowadays I couldn't stand like 99% of that. And when I look at comedy, like in general, whether it's regular comedy or whether it's that more political comedy. Nowadays, like when I see a short clip from a comedy show here on YouTube, I don't get it. I don't get why in the clip the people are all laughing so much. I don't get why in the comments there's so much praise for how funny it is, because a lot of it is not witty at all. A lot of it is so simple, just playing into cliches and prejudices, or a lot of times there's not even a joke. If you look at this comedy, a lot of times it seems to me that they are just like sort of throwing out certain scenarios or certain buzzwords, and it's more the way they present it that makes it clear that it is supposed to be funny. It's like they're asking, okay, please laugh at this point. And then people actually do laugh, more out of social convention or more out because of everyone else laughing, and that also makes you laugh, but not because it's actually particularly funny or witty. And so, yeah, sure, the man of intellect will maybe not laugh so easily, but Kant says he will enjoy laughing. And so Kant rejects this moral purism that says do not laugh or do not play cards or think about even the most small action and how you do it, if you do it with the left or the right hand. And it's precisely that purism that would reject sensuality, that would reject fun, that would reject pleasure, right? To which Kant says, well, we are not pure spirits. Yes, we are rational beings and we ought to behave as such. We ought to not let our sensuality, our animalistic side take over. That's not prudent, that's not good for our health, and it's not moral. Even if it doesn't harm others, it is against our own dignity. But he explicitly says we are not supposed to disembody ourselves. Morality does not demand getting rid of our body, of our sensual side. To completely get rid of your sensuality, through strict asceticism, sort of kill off all your sensual desires, that Kant would call a waving delusion. Waving, as I already said, always means somehow stepping over the limits, the borders set by reason, somehow going too far. And delusion to Kant always means losing sight of your true purpose and giving too much importance to something which does not have the highest importance, confusing a mere means for a purpose with a purpose with an end in itself. So Kant would say that things like fasting or abstaining sexually, they might have value in certain situations as means, be it to morality or to prudence, right? Sure, it's neither moral to just eat whatever you want, it's undignified, or to just follow every sexual desire, even if it means maybe abusing or raping someone, nor is it prudent. It will probably ruin your health. But the purists who say that you must live with asceticism, you must fast, you must not have sex or whatever, again, you must not bathe, like those certain saints of late antiquity or the Middle Ages that I mentioned earlier, those purists are delusional because these things, like not eating, not having sex, only sleeping on a hard bed, not on a proper bed, but let's say just sleeping on the floor, all these ascetic actions, they have no moral value in themselves. You're not a better person for sleeping on a rock instead of a bed. You're not a better person for only eating water and bread instead of tasty food. Maybe, again, in certain situations, This can help morality as a means, okay, that we would have to check case by case, but it has not a value in itself. So Kant says, by all means, do practice a certain self-discipline towards your body, towards your sensual desires, but don't think that just disciplining yourself and abstaining from every desire in itself is a moral action. We are rational beings, Kant says. We do have a spirit or a soul, but we are not pure angels. The body was given to us as a vehicle of our soul. And so we should take care of it. We should treat it well. And therefore, Kant says, against our sensual desires, against our instincts, we should rather use cunning rather than force, trying to direct them, to regulate them, not to oppress them and euthanize them. At the end of the day, Kant would generally say whatever is natural is purposive. It has a place. Like the purists would say, the love that you have for yourself or for the other sex, so the natural drive to self-preservation or to sexuality, you must completely reject that. You must abstain from any sex, and you must be willing to throw yourself away for others completely. Kant would say no. Something like sexuality is a natural part of being a human being. Morality does not demand from us changing our very nature, going against something that is inherent in our species. It only demands using our nature, using our desires in a rational manner. So Kant would say, guide your desires, regulate your desires so that they serve you and don't enslave you. So if we take the desire for food as an example, Kant would say probably, well, sure, don't be a glutton. Don't every day stuff yourself on the most unhealthy fast food. Again, it's not dignified. Therefore, it's immoral. But it's also not healthy. Therefore, it's not prudent. But don't just fast and go hungry all the time and starve yourself. That's not moral either. Rather, ideally, you should train your tastes so that the healthy food is also that which you're hungry for, that which you have an appetite for, that which tastes best for you. While you should probably make sure that you don't crave unhealthy food in the first place, right? Which is, for example, more or less how I live. I mean, I've just pretty much my whole day since I was a child grown up on organic food that was self-cooked, and I've never once eaten at McDonald's, and I have zero desire for that, or at Burger King or whatever. It's enough if I step into one of those stores to smell the smell. It smells disgusting to me. It also looks disgusting. When I see this bread, or even of the burgers, that looks like it's made of paper, of carton or something. So I just have zero desire for this fast food. It's not that I'm denying myself that I'm living as an ascet. I just have no appetite for that. And this is something you can train by what you allow yourself in the first place, right? Like if you never take a drug, you also don't get addicted to it probably. And then what you repeat, right? What you get used to. So Kant is saying our natural desires, they should be purposive. They should serve a purpose, giving us a good, a healthy life. And we should try to govern them so that they are as purposive as possible. We should not let them rule ourselves and become unpurposive. but we don't have to utterly reject them. So in conclusion, Kant is against what he calls the virtue of monks, this demand to completely kill off the flesh and the desires of the flesh. Also, like Nietzsche would later go into more, Kant already understands psychologically that this morality is dishonest, that if you demand humility from others, demand abstaining, asceticism, being humble, there's something very not humble. There's something very arrogant in that demand. You are, through the back door, elevating yourself. And Kant also says the goal shouldn't be to weaken ourselves, to weaken the body, to weaken sensuality. There are certain moral teachings, again, certain forms of purism, that say the weaker you are, the less tempted you are. Again, think of those medieval Christian saints that would fast so much they could not, out of weakness, even get up. They would just lie around, basically on the brink of death. Sure, if you're like that, you're probably not tempted to commit adultery or whatever. But Kant would say that's not how we should go about it. We should not weaken ourselves. Instead, we should rather strengthen ourselves and our body. We should harden ourselves. Kant is a fan of Diogenes, the ancient Cynic philosopher, and he, of course, famously, apart from being the first to invent the art of trolling, he, of course, famously did not have a house. He basically lived like a hobo on the street. Or he famously, through the one possession he had, a drinking cup away, when he saw a child drinking water just from his hand. So, of course, Kant was not quite as extreme as Diogenes, but he says the general point he had is right, that we should be as independent as possible, and that we should sort of harden ourselves and not depend on every possible luxury. And I already said in one of my earlier lectures that to Kant, the allegory of virtue is Heracles fighting the Hydra. The Hydra, whenever you cut off a head, new heads grow out of it. The Hydra symbolizes all the essential desires that might lead us to commit immoral acts, and that never die down. And Heracles fighting it symbolizes strength. Virtue is about strength, Kant says. Right? I mean, the very word comes from the Latin vir, which means man. So the Romans talked of it as a certain manliness. Likewise, the German word, which is Tugend, comes from the German word taugen, which means being fit for something, being useful, so to say. Virtue is not about being too weak to commit sins or to commit evil acts or to commit crimes, but rather it is about being strong enough to have discipline over yourself. I mean, this weak virtue, that's again the slave virtue that Nietzsche criticizes. Nietzsche likes to talk about the lambs and the birds of prey, and how the lambs that are peacefully eating their grass are being preyed upon by these birds, these hawks or eagles or whatever. And then the lambs complain and they will say, oh, these birds of prey are evil because they prey on us, because they kill us. And we, the lambs, we are good because we don't kill anyone, because we are vegetarians. And Nietzsche points out how dishonest this sort of slave morality is, because the lambs are not vegetarians because they chose to not kill anyone, but rather because they're lambs, because it's their nature. So you should not be weak and then pretend that your weakness is somehow a virtue. Being too weak to commit a crime does not make you a good person. Being strong enough to restrain yourself from committing a crime, that is what makes you a good person. So, again, Kant rejects the virtue of monks, he rejects moral purism, he rejects absolute asceticism. A very important motive that often repeats in what he writes and what he says in his lectures is the constantly cheerful heart. That to him is the attitude of the wise person. It doesn't mean that you're constantly super excited and having the fun of your life and lots of pleasure necessarily. It's more about a more quiet cheerfulness. But it does mean that you're not miserable, that you're not constantly beating yourself up or denying yourself every single joy in life. In my next few upcoming lectures, when I talk about what Kant has to say about a happy life, I will come back at some point to this constantly cheerful heart. But I already want to point it out here that this is the attitude, according to Kant, that you should cultivate yourself. This is the mood that the wise, the moral person should have, this cheerful heart. The moral duty should not be done reluctantly and grinding your teeth. It should be done with joy. Now, it should not be done out of joy. That's important. Again, you can go back to my lecture on the radical evil. You can also go back to my lecture on the goodwill. Kant would say we should do what's right only because it's right, not because it brings us pleasure, for example, to help others. If we do it for that reason, then we are not good people. But you must not misunderstand that as Kant saying we are not allowed to feel pleasure in doing right. It simply should not be our reason why we do it. We should do it even if it brings no pleasure to us. But if we do it for the right reason and it also happens to bring us pleasure, then that's great for us. So, Kant would say we should do morality with a cheerful heart. We should have joy in morality. Also, the same is true for religion, by the way. I will soon, after being done with talking about happiness, I will get to Kant's philosophy of religion. I can already say that here too, Kant says we should be pious, but in a cheerful manner, serving God with a joyful heart, not being joyless and strict and always brooding in how we serve God. And this is also important because Kant believes that if you do your moral duty only reluctantly, if you don't have any joy in doing what is right, then you probably won't do what's right for long, right? Kant says if you secretly hate the moral law, maybe you follow it for now because you do believe it's your duty, but you feel that this law only restricts you and only makes your life harder, then you will try to think of justifications and excuses to not act morally. And likewise to these purists that even make it a matter of conscience whether you give the charity with your right or with your left hand, Kant says, whose conscience is a tyrant, that person will try to give his conscience holidays, to send it away, so as not to be tyrannized by it any longer. And making yourself unhappy, denying yourself all fun and pleasure, is not only not demanded by morality, it would probably rather do a disservice to humanity, to morality, because Kant says, if you are unhappy with your life, you just have more temptations to do evil, right? If you are hungry, you're maybe tempted to steal. If you are sexually dissatisfied, you are maybe tempted to rape or to take revenge. I mean, think of these incels who end up shooting people because they believe women owe them sex. So if you lead a happy life, you're probably less likely to lash out at others, to do immoral acts. Kant would also say it is against the duties towards yourself to deny yourself happiness. These duties are not about making yourself happy. I said that and explained it further in the lecture on the duties towards yourself. You don't have a positive duty to make yourself happy. But you certainly don't have a negative duty to not make yourself happy. You certainly should not deny yourself happiness. Kant also says if you are unhappy, not only do you have maybe more temptations to harm others, but also you would begrudge others their happiness. While on the other hand, if you feel fulfilled, then and only then can you be more compassionate and have more sympathy towards others. I think all of that is very important. All these remarks of Kant's align with my own philosophy that expands further on this. Because in my thinking, it is about the dichotomy of courage and fear. And courage is really a feeling of abundance, of being full, even overfull. You feel courageous when you feel you have enough strength to deal with a challenge. While on the other hand, fear is a feeling of lack, of not having enough, of barely being able to secure yourself. And so any small challenge is considered a too much, is considered a threat. And so really, courage is about strength, fear is about weakness. And so you can say that courage, strength, virtue, and on the other hand, fear, weakness, and lack of virtue, vice, are almost identical. If you feel that you have strength to deal with life, if you feel that you were blessed with richness, with abundance, that you have enough of strength to not only carry yourself, but maybe to take on additional responsibilities, to maybe help others, then you also will help others. But if you feel that you can barely take care of yourself, that everything that comes your way is too much, then you will reject all responsibilities. Then you will throw others under the bus. Then you will not help others, or maybe you will even take from others to compensate for your lack. If you feel you have an abundance, you don't have to take from others, or you don't have to jealously guard what you have, because you don't have to be afraid of losing a little bit if you have too much anyways. So therefore, and that was important for me to stress, Kant would say don't fall for some moral purism that tells you need to be some joyless robot that just follows the moral law strictly. No, you even should be someone who has a cheerful heart, who enjoys his life. You just should not get carried away by your sensual desires. You just should not let them rule you and lead you to immoral acts or to unhealthy or short-sighted actions that are not even your self-interest. So I will point out that there are some inconsistencies in Kant's writings. Fichte would later on be more clear and very clearly distinguish between lower and higher morality. And the lower morality, that is what Nietzsche criticizes as slave morality. That is this Platonic Christian thinking I described, where there's a clear opposition between the moral law, your duty, and your desires, your self-interest. So if you follow lower morality, then you will be moral, you will follow the moral law because you think it's right, but you will think that this means you have to reject your own joy, your own self-interest. But for the higher morality, it aligns. The higher morality understands that doing what is right is also that which usually makes you the most happy, right? I mean, in our day and age, the best example I can think of is always Greta Thunberg. I mean, just look at how happy she has become since she started her activism, which cured her of her depression, cured her of not wanting to eat, of not wanting to talk to people. If you look at her now in interviews or interacting with fellow activists, she's always laughing, she's always giggling. She is way more cheerful and joyful than all these hateful, angry, resentful people that constantly attack her. And take on the other hand, someone like Trump, I don't think anyone has ever seen him laughing, right? He clearly has no joy in his life. But the point is that Kant has not made this distinction between higher and lower morality quite clearly yet. And while he himself, in his personal life, was cheerful, did live more like you should, following higher morality, there are some of his writings on morality that still sound like in his thinking he was on the level of lower morality, thinking that there is an opposition and contradiction between the demands of the moral law and your own personal pleasure. But all in all, the real spirit of Kant's philosophy is that prudence and morality align more often than not. And I just want to also point out that this whole morality that rejects pleasure, which Kant likes to call the misanthropic or also the grumpy ethics, that it would simply not fit Kant as a person. As I said at the start, there's this whole prejudice, there's these cliches towards Kant's philosophy, and it also extends to his person. I mean, people will hear, okay, he stayed a bachelor all his life, he never married, and his days were so structured. I mean, there's this cliche even that Kant was so punctual, so on time, that the people of Königsberg would check their clocks and compare their clocks to Kant, but that is just a legend. That is actually not true, and that legend only came about decades after Kant's death, really. But people hear these stories and then they will think, oh, Kant was this joyless, pedantic, emotionless scholar living like a complete robot, living this mechanical life, just doing his duty and his philosophy and nothing else. Um, but nothing could be further from the truth. And I would ask people, do you really, really, in the depths of your heart, believe this is even possible? That someone could be wise while being grumpy? That someone could have truly great thoughts, truly great insights, that someone could find truth while being utterly joyless? I mean, there have been such thinkers, yeah, thinkers that were pessimistic, grumpy, misanthropic, depressed. Think of people like Schopenhauer or like Wittgenstein, and then you will clearly see what sort of philosophy you get if you let a grumpy person do the thinking. Certainly not true philosophy, certainly not true wisdom. No, Kant clearly says at some point, he who wants to engage in speculation, that is, in metaphysics and philosophy, should be calm, should be moral, and should be content with the state of his life, with his outer state. These are the prerequisites for doing metaphysics, for doing philosophy. And so I don't want to close off without also having briefly talked about Kant as a person, about Kant's own character, you could say. And Kant was someone who knew how to live and who did overall live a happy life. It is true that he lived a calm life, befitting of a philosopher, of a wise man. He was not prone to excess. But that does not mean that it was a completely ascetic or joyless life. I mean, Kant, for example, enjoyed good food. He knew quite a bit about cooking. When he was at dinner tables, he would have conversations with the ladies that were there about cooking, about recipes. So much so that people were joking that after his three main works, the Critique of Pure Reason, the Critique of Practical Reason, and the Critique of the Power of Judgment, he would also one day publish a critique of the art of cooking. He also liked to be sent by acquaintances or by fans from outside of Königsberg, where he lived, certain delicacies like good Teltower turnips or good Göttinger sausages. Kant also liked to go for walks. He had his daily walk. And you mustn't think that he was just going for a walk to be lost in deep thoughts. He was not like Thales, the very first philosopher, of which this anecdote is retold that he walked around looking at the stars in the sky at night, so lost in his contemplation that he fell into some ditch or some well and had a Thracian servant woman laugh at him. No, Kant actually says that during the walk you should just enjoy your walk, and you should precisely not focus on thinking. You should do that when you are in your study, during the specific times that you reserve for thinking, and at other times you should let your mind rest a bit. Also, Kant was a very social person. Pretty much daily, he had these dinner comings together. He would either invite friends to his place, or he would be invited by friends and then spend a considerable part of pretty much every day in being together, being social, having conversations. And here he was open to some alcohol, particularly wine. He considered wine to be a thing that vises the spirit and that vivifies a social get-together. Of course, he was for drinking it in moderation, not for getting drunk. He also wasn't a particular fan of other alcohols. He would say that beer makes you more melancholy rather than more open and cheerful like the wine does. And that booze is just too much, just takes away your mind. But and also he was against drinking alone, let alone getting drunk on your own. But a bit of wine in moderation as a means of enjoying your get together, your time with others more, that was fine to him. But even when it comes to the moderation part, Kant was not always so strict, at least in his younger years. There's at least one time where apparently he drank so much wine with his friends that afterwards, when he was trying to come home in the evening and he lived in a very narrow alley, he could not find the entrance to his alley. So he must have been quite drunk. And that's an anecdote that he himself liked to retell in later years of his life to make people laugh. Also, when it comes to these dinners with other people, these social gatherings, it's important that the people there, Kant's friends, Kant's acquaintances, they were not necessarily his colleagues from the university, let alone other philosophers. And indeed, he did not have much relationships with such people. Rather, they were people from the Königsberg society, like some noblemen, some people from the bourgeois of the city. There were officers from the army amongst his acquaintances. There were physicians. There were some priests. There were tradesmen. There were some ladies also at these gatherings. And when it comes to the conversations Kant had, it was more about anecdotes, about the world. Kant liked to read lots about what people were discovering on their voyages to other continents, and then he would talk maybe about, oh, did you know there's this exotic kind of animal, or did you know in China they have this custom, or in some place in Africa they dress like that. He would not have complicated, profound philosophical conversations in these social gatherings. He would not talk about metaphysics or about his own critique of reason. Indeed, when others tried to talk about these topics with him at these dinner parties, Kant would rather try to change the topic. To him, these gatherings were not the right place to discuss too serious matters. Such conversations are too exhaustive, and such conversations about serious matters could also easily lead to conflicts or to heated debates. And Kant was of the opinion that social life, people coming together, should be more for letting yourself and letting your mind rest a bit from work. And apart from that, society to him was meant to civilize people, to make people more tactful, to develop people's taste, not to have scientific debates. And if a topic did get heated, Kant says in such a social gathering with your friends, with your acquaintances, you should not insist on being right, even if it causes disruption and conflict. Rather, it's better if things get a bit heated, to make a joke, to make a witty remark that sort of dissolves the situation and changes the topic again. And apparently he himself was very good at that. He had quite a bit of humor and could be quite witty. Indeed, as I said earlier, according to Kant, a man of intellect may not laugh easily, but he likes to laugh. And Kant liked good humor. He liked reading satirical authors, particularly the British ones. He liked reading someone like Jonathan Swift. That's something he enjoyed. He also says that when it comes to the vices of people, you should also treat them with humor. It's better to present them as laughable than as hateable. If people hate the vices, it very easily it leads to them also hating the people who have and commit vices. If possible, and in most cases it is possible, we should try to paint people more from their ridiculous side than their evil side. And indeed, I mean, just think of life, of your own actions or the actions of the people around you. Day to day, most people act in such a ridiculous, such a childish manner. I mean, just one example out of thousands I could give. A friend told me that he was at a family gathering and his grandma had a piece of cake, and then she wanted to eat sausage on a bread, or maybe it was the other way around, that doesn't matter. The point is just that she wanted to eat it from the same plate. And his aunt was like, oh no, that you cannot eat cake and then sausage bread from the same plate, you need another plate. And the grandma was like, no, it's no problem, let me keep this plate. And a fight broke out over that. Like, the aunt was trying to take the plate away and give the grandma another plate. And the grandma held on to the plate and they were both tugging at the plate. And my friend told me that later he was in another room with the uncle, with the husband of the aunt. And the uncle basically just said, yeah, this is my life. This is how she always is. And it is absolutely clear. I don't know this aunt, but I don't need to know her because I know people. It is absolutely clear, and I'm willing to bet that this aunt is an evil person. That she does lots of evil. She clearly is not doing a thing to make this world a better place. I doubt she's out there on the streets fighting for justice, for Palestine, or fighting the climate crisis. If anything, she's contributing to it. Mindlessly flying with the plane on vacation. She's probably mindlessly shopping, mindlessly consuming new clothes or a new iPhone or whatever. Not spending a single thought on how these are produced, where the resources come from, how much the people are exploited that produce them. She's probably also treating her own children with disregard. All of that I'm absolutely certain of. She is not a good person. But, as Kant says, instead of just condemning her and just saying how evil she is and how much harm she causes with her lack of regard and with her thoughtlessness, it can be much better to just show how ridiculous, how childish, how completely unnecessary her actions are, and how she's causing day to day so much distress or annoyance, not just to people around her, but also to herself. I mean, she could spare herself these small fights, this unhappiness. She could just let things be and probably lead a much more happy life. And this is precisely what Kant means when he says, if you can, better show people from their ridiculous side than from their evil side. But yeah, that is Kant. Also, he very much enjoyed nature, being in nature, the beauty of nature. He enjoyed a bird that would come to his garden, that would sing in front of his window every spring. He would enjoy being at a little hut that a friend of his owned in the forest, getting out from the city life a little bit. And lastly, Kant also enjoyed playing. He enjoyed games. He, at least in younger years, liked to go to the theater sometimes. When he was a student, he would play pool to make some money, and apparently he was so good at it that eventually no one wanted to play with him anymore because they would just be losing money. So I hope this little image of Kant as a person goes to show that he was not some joyless Puritan who is just preaching abstinence and following your moral duty in a grumpy manner without having any pleasure in life. No, that is not Kant at all. And that is not what he stands for, even though people again and again interpret his morality in such a manner. And to close this off, I just want to clarify, however, that I'm not stressing all of this to make an argument for following Kant's moral philosophy. I'm not trying to, through this, convince people of Kant's morality. Like, my point is not telling people, oh, actually, if you do what Kant considers moral, it's good for you. It will also make you more happy, so therefore you should do it. No, not at all. Because this, again, would reduce morality to a teaching of happiness. This, again, would bring eudaimonism into morality, which Kant utterly rejects. I am only stressing that Kant is not for the rejection of sensuality, that Kant is not against having joy in life, because it simply is the truth. And I want to do Kant justice. But I do not want this to be an argument to convince people of Kant's morality. Because Kant does reject what he calls the grumpy or misanthropic ethics, yes. But he says what is even worse is the flattering ethics, which would be precisely a morality that tries to tempt people into being moral through their own self-interest, telling people, oh, actually, if you act morally, you lead the most happy life. Kant says this grumpy ethics might be wrong. And it might also have the problem that, like I already said, he who is too grumpy, he who hates doing what is moral, might be tempted to not do it after all. But Kant says it can still lead to people being moral. It can even lead to sublime actions if people think that morality is about self-rejection and about not caring for your own interest, for your own pleasure at all. This flattering morality, however, takes all the value away from the moral law. It reduces morality to a mere tool to get ahead in life, to lead a happy life. Well, the problem is always if something is only a tool for us, it only has relative value insofar as it is a working tool. And if it doesn't work, or if something else works better, we will throw it away. So if you get people to do what is right, not because it's right, but because it benefits them, then as soon as people get into a situation where it doesn't benefit them, like I mentioned earlier, right? If you live in the Nazi times or like in any sort of despotic or tyrannical system, where you should resist, but resistance also maybe risks your life, then in such a situation when doing the right thing does not benefit people, those people who have only done it because it benefits them will stop doing it. And so Kant is very much against presenting morality in that way. This is also important for education, for pedagogy, and I will eventually get to Kant's pedagogy, where he talks about how we should raise children into morality or into religion, and he's very much against telling them, oh, acting moral will benefit you in this life, or maybe it will benefit you in the afterlife. If you act moral, God will send you to heaven, because that will mean addressing people's selfishness, trying to make them do what is right out of selfish reasons. And like I said, if they ever get into a situation where these selfish reasons lead to them not doing what is right, then that is precisely what they will do. So, no. Me saying, or Kant saying, morality usually aligns with prudence is not supposed to be an argument for morality. You're supposed to follow morality even when it doesn't align with prudence, and you're supposed to do this out of reverence for the moral law, out of reverence for freedom, out of reverence for the dignity of humanity. Nothing else, no happiness, not yours, nor for that matter other people's, should matter to you in your moral actions. But once again, that does not mean that happiness as such must be rejected. In fact, as I said, most of the time, living a moral life, living in accordance with your duty, living a dignified life will also be most prudent, and will also lead to you being much more happy, or at least much less unhappy than less moral people. That is what I had to say in general as a sort of preface for my next few lectures. That Kant does not utterly reject sensuality, that actually he believes most of the time you are most happy when you are also moral. And now in the next few lectures, I want to get more into that and look at some specific aspects of that. And talk about how to Kant mostly the teaching of happiness is a negative one. So you don't need to positively do something to be happy, but rather mostly you need to not do certain things that would make you unhappy. Largely to him, happiness is about independence. Being independent both from your own psyche, you could say, independent from your affections and passions, not being their slave, but also being independent of your inclinations, of your needs, and therefore of certain things in the world that you need to be happy, and without which you would be unhappy. However, there is also a positive way towards happiness, and that is that Kant says it's much better to seek happiness not so much in indulging and passively being pleasured by something, but rather it is better to seek happiness in activity, in doing something, in creating something, in being productive. But all of this I want to address in my next lectures in the upcoming weeks. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Cenk Kubilay Altu, Thomas Doringer, Kim Giamatti, Ellen Hansen, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Spendierhosenträger, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.